Hey guys, I was researching rogue builds as my rogue is nearing 60, and I was going through a lot of the top builds. There's primarily three that you see on Icy Veins, Wowhead, they all have the same builds. And they're the combat swords, which is this one we're looking at right now, the combat daggers, and the cold blood prep PvP build. So the first two are PvE builds. The last build, the cold blood build we're looking at right now, is for PvP. And I was considering, which of these builds looked good to me and, which one I should pick. And really, I wouldn't want to play any of these three builds. As a fresh 60 in phase one, I don't think any of these builds are a good choice for me right now. And I guess I'll start with the PvP build and explaining why this build wouldn't be a good option for me right now. Number one, pretty much a large majority of the time is going to be dedicated to dungeon grinding right now for all my loot. So I'm going to be spamming a lot of dungeons to try and get pre-raid abyss, and I'm going to be doing a fair bit of raiding to try and get raid gear. And I'm going to be PvPing as I do this, but my primary goals are going to be doing dungeons and raids. And if I play this PvP build, I mean, if you look at some of these talents, heightened senses, hemo, prep, dirty deeds, none of these do anything in raiding in PvE. Pretty much the entire subtlety tree is completely useless in dungeons and raids. Not only that, cold blood is not good in PvE either. And, a guarantee crit every 3 minutes, that's, hardly gonna make much of a difference in terms of PvE damage. So while this is an amazing PvP build, because of how much time I'm going to be spending in dungeons, this build is just not an option for me. And one last thing I want to mention is if I were to try and bring this build into raid, I would really be struggling to be hit capped because you need 9% hit to be hit capped in raid. And you see the precision talent is not taken in this build. And the weapon expertise, is obviously not taken. So how are you getting your 9% hit unless you have like almost every hit piece in the game pre-raid? You're not going to be hit capped going into raids. So this build is really not an option for me when I hit 60. Definitely a great PvP build, just not a good option for me while I'm still gearing up. Now, you might say, okay, well, why not go for the raiding build, the PvE build here, the combat swords? And this build, while great in PvE, really has very few PvP talents. We've got improved sprint, improved gouge, and I mean that's kind of it. Beyond that, you're just relying on doing a lot of damage from your combat talents. And so while I did want to do well in dungeons and raids, I'm not super focused on doing the maximum possible damage in raid. And it's important to me to do well in PvP, and I'm going to be looking for PvP as I'm going around the world. So I don't want to play a build that's so one dimensional as a raiding or PvE build either. So I don't want to play any of these three builds. I would, however, be interested in playing kind of a hybrid of the two. And so I'm going to show you a few builds that are kind of hybrids, combinations of the two builds put together that I think are much better builds for phase one if you're interested in PvP and PvE. Now, if you're just a PvE player, these builds are just fine. But if you are interested in having a good PvP build while doing decent in dungeons and raids as well, I think you'll really like some of these builds. So the first one is just gonna go through preparation and hemorrhage. All these builds I'm going to show you are going to go for preparation, hemorrhage, and blade flurry. And the reason I feel like this combination is the best is because when you're choosing between like which PvP tree you want to pair with combat, you can choose assassination and get cold blood, or you can choose subtlety and you get preparation and hemorrhage and a suite of excellent PvP talents. So for me, I think it's a pretty easy decision to go with subtlety. Now, in terms of combat, this build can be combat swords or maces. You can just reallocate the sword spec over to mace spec if you're maces. And this build, what I really like about it is you're at the kind of perfect state where the PvP build was going into some pretty niche talents because it had, it just had leftover talents. So stuff like heightened senses, stuff like improved exposed armor that aren't necessarily great talents, but are kind of just the best of what's available. But I feel like this build goes through all of subtlety, takes all the best talents, and then stops. And then you go over to combat and you take all the best talents there. And you're not suffering, by picking all these filler talents. So by going this spec, you're going to have 5% hit from talents. So you only need 4% more to get raid hit capped. In terms of PvP, not only are you going to have the subtlety talents, but you're not just way worse than the cold blood build. You have improved sprint, you have improved kick, and if you are maces, you have improved mace specialization. For your swords, obviously, sword spec is still good in PvP. But this build in dungeons, blade flurry is a big deal for cleaving down enemies, and I feel like this build is really what I want to be doing because I'm confident in PvP that I can beat, any class with this configuration because I've got improved sap against warlocks and hunters. I've got dirty deeds for the matchups where I'm garroting and cheap shotting. I still have, initiative to help me with my, one-shot openers. And I even have improved sprint to improve like the mage matchup. And even though it's not the ideal build and I don't have cold blood, it doesn't feel like you're playing a terrible PvP spec like it kind of does feel if you go full PvE. So this is kind of the build I am going to be going. But there's a few variations as well. The one I'll show you is the Dagger version, which I think is pretty cool. You swap out Master of Deception for Opportunity. Instead of going for Elusiveness, you go for Improved Ambush, taking 1 point out of Initiative. And then you still get the PvP suite of these 5 talents. And then you go down Combat, and instead of needing to put 5 points in Mace spec or Sword spec at the end, you can put 5 more points into Crit. And you're going to go for the Improved Backstab, and instead of having to put a point in Lightning Reflexes or Improved Sinister Strike. And then you still get Improved Sprint, and you have the Dagger spec. So this build is another great PvE build. You're going to get 10% crit, as well as all of the essential PvP talents in subtlety. And you're still going to be doing just fine in dungeon and raid. So hopefully this helps you guys. This is the talent build that I think I'm going to end up going with the mace build because I do have a Massa McGowan. So this is the build I'm going to be going at 60 while I'm gearing up. Once I am really geared, I am going to be playing a spec that looks very similar to this cold blood, if not this exact spec, something very similar, because this is an amazing build, but again, kind of one-dimensional for PvP. So hopefully this helps you guys with picking a spec, and thanks for watching.